And so as we begin and we get started, I just want to thank God for what he's doing and what he allows. And you may hear a little music in the background, and that's just to continue to set the atmosphere as I minister his word. I wanted to do something a little bit different today. Hopefully it's not too loud, it's not a nuisance, but it's definitely helping the atmosphere. So once again, my name is Pastor DC Elliott for the Body of Christ Christian Ministries on Daystar Church Campus. I'm a member of Daystar Church Campus as well, Daystar Church, and we're just about sharing the word. So I thank you for listening to this message and being here with us today as we explore God's word. Today I'm going to be in the book of Judges, chapters 6 and 7, and that deals with the story of Gideon. Now, Gideon is an interesting character because he's not unlike a lot of us, and I'll get to a little bit about him when I get into the story. But this message came out of a thought that it's amazing how people who are unsaved seem to always be doing, and then people that are saved seem to always be praying and asking God to guide them, to lead them, or to do something for them. In our sinful state, when we have a sinful desire, we just go out and do it and face the consequences later, sometimes with no regard of what the consequences might be. But when we become Christians, we get canonized, and we tend not to want to do anything. We want to wait for God to do something before we move. And I think there's something a little bit weird or strange or crazy about that, because it would make it seem that God would rather us to stand back and do nothing while we're waiting on him to move, instead of us getting out to do something that we have the ability to do ourselves. Scripture tells us he gives us the ability to get wealth and get it more abundantly. Why would he say that if he wanted us to just sit back and wait? He does want us to seek his leading and his guidance in everything that we do, but that's different than not moving at all. Sometimes in faith being, according to Hebrews, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So there is an element that God acknowledges through his word of things that we don't quite have the physical evidence of, that we're still supposed to pursue as if we had the physical evidence of it. So he even deals with that a little bit, but it's amazing how we would rather not move or not do something, waiting for God to move, and then blame God for nothing happening in our lives. So God brought me to the story of Gideon today, and I thought it was interesting because Gideon shares some of the same kind of characteristics and issues that we have. Even when we know God is guiding us along the way, we'll still ask him every step of the way, God, is it okay? Or God, would you show me a sign? But people in the world don't wait for signs. They just go out and do. If they want to make something happen, they'll just go make it happen. And things happen for them, and we wonder why it happens for them in their sinful nature and why it doesn't happen for us. And I would say, because while we're waiting for God to move, they're out there moving things themselves. They're actually using the principles that God placed out in the world, even though they don't realize it. And so there are examples of how to make things happen. Of course, we should do it in a godly manner with God in consideration and driven by the purpose that God created us for. And that way, still give God the credit for the results. But God was clear in his word. He told us we have the ability to do some things. And while we're waiting on an answer for him, he's waiting on us to move. Because sometimes if we would just move, we'll see the answer that we're waiting for him to give us. And he's just waiting for us to move so we can see, instead of us waiting to see so we can move. So I'm going to read out of the book of Judges. I'm going to read the New Living Translation. because it's a little bit clearer. And we're going to go through this story of Gideon. Now, if you don't know anything about Gideon or what was happening in the Old Testament during that time, God had already saved the children of Israel and brought them out of captivity in the book of Judges. And but God still allowed the children of Israel to be persecuted because of their sinful nature. So the book, chapter 6 starts out saying the Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight. And so God handed them over to the Midianites for 7 years. So this deals with or talks about the issue of them still not complying to the things that God commanded of them at the time. And so what happened? He took his hand of favor off of them and allowed them to be subjected to the Midianites for 7 years. And the Midianites were so cruel that the Israelites made hiding places for themselves in the mountains, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, marauders from Midian, Amalek, and the people of the east would attack Israel, camping in the land and destroying the crops from as far as Gaza. They left the Israelites with nothing to eat, taking all of the sheep, goats, and cattle and donkeys. These enemy hordes coming with their livestock and tents were as thick as locusts when they arrived on the droves of camels too numerous to count. And they stayed until the land was stripped bare. So Israel was reduced to starvation by the Midianites. Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help. Isn't that typical? When we get into trouble from our disobedience, the first thing that we do is cry out for help because of the oppression that we subjected ourselves to, in so many words. And when they cried out to the Lord because of Midian, the Lord sent a prophet to Israel, to the Israelites. He said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of slavery in Egypt. I rescued you from the Egyptians and from all who oppressed you. I drove out your enemies and gave you their land. I told you, I am the Lord your God. You must not worship the gods of the Amorites in those lands who you now live, but you have not listened to me." So God is making clear what it is that they've done that has displeased them. They've worshiped other gods. Because like he said, he took them out of captivity from Egypt. They were slaves. He brought them out of captivity and he gave them the land of his enemies as he promised. Why would you not want to worship God in that case? Why would you not want to give him praise? When God has shown himself to be true in your life, why not worship him? That's what's being said here. So I'm gonna put it to you. I'm gonna ask this rhetorical question for you to think about it the same way that God posed it to the Amorites. To the Israelites. I am God, and I told you not to worship other gods. I've shown myself to be true in your life. I have changed and moved things, and you know that I'm real. Why would you worship other gods? Why would you serve another God and not serve me when I've shown myself to be real to you? And then the angel of the Lord came and sat beneath the great tree at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash, of the clan of Abiezer. Gideon's son of Joash was threshing wheat at the bottom of the winepress to hide the grain from the Midianites. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "Mighty hero, the Lord is with you." "Sir," Gideon replied, "if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? And where are all the miracles our ancestors told us about?" Didn't they say the Lord brought us out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to the Midianites. So here's Gideon hiding in a wine press. The wine press is an underground cavern that was designed to press grapes. He was threshing his wheat there, his grains there, so that the Midianites would not see him, because anytime a harvest came, they would come in and they would destroy everything. So he was hiding out of fear of them coming to take his land. And he questions this angel and says, hey, where are the miracles that our ancestors told us about? Why has God abandoned us? Well, God made it clear at the beginning. Even when he delivered them out of Egypt, they worshiped other gods, and God warned them. And so many times they were captive for 40 years because they worshiped other gods. Some of their great ancestors never even made it into the promised land because they worshiped other gods. And once again, they're doing the same thing over again, worshiping other gods. So Gideon asked the question, why has God abandoned us and handed us over to the Midianites? We know that answer. What in your life are you questioning God about? Why is he allowing something to happen to you when you know you're not worshiping him, you know you're not praising him, you know you're not depending on him the way that you should, and yet you ask the question, God, why is this happening to me? We know we're not doing all that we should do, all that's reasonable. And so as we continue, then the Lord turned to him and said, go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you. But Lord, Gideon replied, how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in my entire family. And the Lord said unto him, I will be with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man. And Gideon replied. Now, before he replied, let me just go back over what the Lord just told him. I'm sending you to deliver Israel out of the hands of the Midianite. He asked, was God still with us? What about the miracles our ancestors told us about? But now, when the Lord said, I'm sending you, he's starting to question. He said everything about what his condition was. I'm in the weakest tribe, I'm in the weakest clan in the tribe of Manasseh. And I'm the weakest one in my family. But God said, I'll be with you. God said, I'll be with you, but he said, I'm the weakest. I think that he believes more in his current situation than he does in the power of the Lord. How many of us are in that same situation? And Gideon replied, if you are truly going to help me, show me a sign to prove that it is really the Lord speaking to me. And when I read this earlier, I found it so funny that isn't that what we revert to? We say, okay, God, if this is really you, if this is really my mate, God, give me a sign. Show me that it is. God, if I'm really supposed to take this job, give me a sign. Show me that it is. God, if I'm supposed to get this car, show me that it's you. Show me that it's truly you so that I know what I'm supposed to do. It's amazing that we get to the point where when we want to justify whatever it is that we're going to do, we challenge God and say, give me a sign. We don't trust just what he said. So Gideon asked for a sign. And this is what happened next. He says, don't go away until I come back and I will bring you an offering. So he asked for a sign, and then he said, okay, I'm going to bring you an offering, so you give me a sign. So now he's trying to earn the proof, because he's trying to give God an offering to get the answer that he wants. And he answered, I will stay until you return. And Gideon hurried home. He cooked a young goat, and with a basket of flour, he baked some bread without yeast. Then he carried the meat in the basket and the broth in a pot, and he brought them out and presented them to the angel who was under the tree. Now, the angel is the same one that they referred to as the Lord earlier in this chapter. And the angel of God said to him, place the meat and the unleavened bread on this rock and pour the broth over it. And Gideon did as he was told. Now, I don't know about you, but if you pour broth on some bread and meat, that's going to make it soggy, right? But here's what happened next. Then the angel of the Lord touched the meat and bread with the tip of his staff in his hand, and a fire flamed up from the rock and consumed all that he had brought. And the angel of the Lord disappeared. So Gideon asked for a sign. And the sign was, after he poured and soaked the meal that he had brought as a sacrifice, the angel of the Lord consumed it with fire completely. Now, nothing wet will burn. So that was truly a sign that he could understand. When Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he cried out, O sovereign Lord, I'm doomed. I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. It is all right, the Lord replied. Don't be afraid. You will not die. And Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and named it Yahweh Shalom, which means God is peace. That's also when you hear people pray, when they say Yahweh Shalom, they're saying God is my peace. That's where they got it from. And the altar remains in Ophrah, in the land of the clan of Abiezer to this day. That night the Lord said to Gideon, take a second bull from your father's herd and one that is 7 years old, and pull down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole standing beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God here on this hilltop sanctuary, laying the stones carefully. Sacrifice the bull as a burnt offering on the altar, using as fuel the wood of the Asherah pole that you cut down. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord commanded. And he did it at night because he was afraid of the other members of his father's household and the people of the town. Now it's interesting. This verse says that Gideon was afraid. Now, this is the second time that we can see that Gideon was afraid, because where did we find him first? We found him threshing his wheat and grain in a wine press, which is an underground cave, hiding from the Midianites who would come in at harvest time and destroy their crops. Then when he talked to the Lord, he said, I'm in the weakest clan of the tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least of my clan, meaning he was the weakest of his clan. And now you hear him say that he was fearful. We're seeing I just want to establish that he was establishing and showing and demonstrating fear. So he was afraid. But the Lord called him mighty. So now we understand why he did not really accept the compliment that God gave him when he called him the mighty one, and when he told him to go with the strength that he had. And now we can understand why he was probably reluctant to accept the fact that God said that he was going to be with him as strength. And we'll see it demonstrated throughout this story. So early the next morning, as the people of the town began to stir, someone discovered that the altar of Baal had been broken and that the Asherah pole beside it had been cut down. in their place, a new altar had been built, and on it the remains of a bull that had been sacrificed. The people said to each other, "Who did this?" And after answering around and making a careful search, they learned that it was Gideon, the son of Joash. "Bring out your son," the men of the town demanded of Joash. "He must die for destroying the altar of Baal and for cutting down the Asherah pole." And Joash shouted to the mob that confronted him, "Why are you defending Baal? Will you argue his case? Whoever pleads his case will be put to death by the morning. If Baal truly is God, then let him defend himself and destroy the one who broke down his altar." From then on, Gideon was called Jerubbaal, which means "let Baal defend himself," because he broke down Baal's altar. So, in his obedience and his fear, he broke down the altar. He broke down the statue of Baal and the Asherah pole and put the altar in place. And then his father stood up for him because, in a sense, he knew that it was not right to be worshiping Baal. That's an indication, because if he would have been as passionate as everybody else, they would have just went and got Gideon and destroyed him out of fear. But Joash knew that there was a God that they should be worshiping, and that's why he did not allow them to harm Gideon. Soon after, the armies of Midian, Amalek, and the people of the east formed an alliance against Jerusalem and crossed the Jordan, camping in the valley of Jezreel. And the Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon with power. He blew a ram's horn as a call to arms, and the men of the clan of Abiezer came to him. Now, the beginning of this verse says, the Spirit of God clothed Gideon with power. The evidence of that was when he blew the horn, all the men came. Remember, he was the weakest of his clan and the weakest in the tribe of Manasseh. But when he blew the horn, all the men came to him. Then Gideon said to God, hold on. He also sent messengers throughout Manasseh, Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, summoning their warriors, and all of them responded. So the favor of God caused the men to respond to Gideon's call. Then Gideon said to God, "If you are truly going to use me to rescue Israel as you promised, prove it to me in this way." Now, I find that really funny. So first of all, he asked for a sign, and God made a soaked rock burn up the meal that he came to serve to him as an offering. That was the first sign. But he wasn't satisfied with that sign to believe that God was with him. He wasn't satisfied when he blew the horn and he sent the summons and everybody showed up. Out of his fear, he's still asking God, okay, now that you've done all of this, I'm still not sure that you're real. I'm still not sure that you're really moving. So can you give me another sign? And not only does he want God to give him a sign, he wants him to give him a sign a specific way. So now, not just asking God to show me a sign is enough. Now he wants it to be specific. Because only if you do it this specific way will I believe that it's you. How many times have we found ourselves in that situation? Asking God for a sign for something that we really don't want to hear, so we try to make it complicated for him. And if he does it, then we'll say, okay, that must still be God. But how many know you still ain't going to be satisfied? Even if he did it the specific way that you wanted, if he showed the sign exactly the way that you wanted it to be, if he granted you exactly what you wanted to have, you still would not acknowledge God as being God because signs are not enough. Signs just convince you for the moment, and then when your fear raises up again, it's going to cause you to ask again and again and again, which means, in essence, you don't really believe. You believe for the moment, and then you flutter in the wind. So here's what happened. He says, prove it to me this way. I will put down fleece on the threshing floor tonight, and if the fleece is wet with dew in the morning, but the ground is dry, then I'll know that you're going to help me rescue Israel as you promised. and that is just what happened. When Gideon got up early the next morning, he squeezed the fleece and wrung it out, and it was wrung out a whole bowl full of water. And then Gideon said to the Lord, please don't be angry with me, but let me make one more request. Let me use the fleece for one more test. This time, let the fleece remain dry while the ground around it is wet with dew. Now, come on, y'all. How ridiculous can we get? This is an example of the things that we go through when we're trying to hear from God and God is really directing us and telling us something. This is the things that we do. This story is the exact. I can think in my own self when I was desperate for a wife and I wanted to believe that a particular person was the one that God called me to, that I asked and did everything that I could to have him prove it to me. But I wasn't satisfied. And if I think back to the situation, it was really my loneliness that was driving me and my desire to be with someone that was driving me more so than God leading me. Sometimes we have to be honest with ourselves and what our motives are and what we're asking. Is it really for our benefit? Is it really because we're trying to do what God wants us to do? Or is it our own desire and our own agenda that we're trying to prove to be true? Because when we ask for certain signs, we really don't want God to do it because that's just an excuse not to do what we know we're supposed to do. It's just the excuse that we need to say it wasn't God speaking. Or we'll take something that has absolutely nothing to do with God and we'll make it seem as if God is doing it as a justification for the behavior that we're doing. We use it both ways. The reality of it is when it's not exactly the way that we want it to be, or when it's exactly what we desire, we use God in both senses and say that whatever the outcome is him. In this case, Gideon asked God for two specific tests, made the test difficult enough so that only God could do it, so that it couldn't be an accident, in essence, removing his excuse from moving. But how many know that he was still scared? He was still in fear. Even though God had proven himself time and time again, God was the one that originally gave him the command to go and rescue the people. It wasn't something that he wanted to do on his own, but he was trying to find a way out. Many times we're trying to find a way out or trying to find a way in. And in many cases, instead of doing like the people of the world do, we make excuses and we wait on God. We wait for a sign to tell us what we should do when we already know what we should do or what we shouldn't do. So he pleads and says, please don't be angry, because he knows at this point he's being foolish. And he thinks that asking for him to be patient is a justification for still asking when he knows he shouldn't. He knows that God is real. God has already proven it to him. And the word talks about that. So that night, God did as Gideon asked. The fleece was dry in the morning and the ground was covered with dew. So Jerubbaal, or Gideon, and his army got up early and went as far as the spring of Harod. And the armies of the Midianites were camped north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. And the Lord said to Gideon, you have too many warriors with you. If I let all of you fight the Midianites, Israel would boast to me that they saved themselves by their own strength. He knows us well. Therefore, tell the people who are timid or afraid that they may leave this mountain and go home. So 22,000 of them went home, leaving only 10,000 who were willing to fight. But the Lord told Gideon, there are still too many. Bring them down to the spring, and I will test them to determine who will go with you and who will not. When Gideon took his warriors down to the water, the Lord told him, divide the men up into two groups. In one group, put all of those who cup their hands in their, who cup water in their hands and lap it up with their tongues like dogs. And in the other group, put all of those who kneel down and drink with their mouths in the stream. Only 300 of the men drank from their hands. All of the others got down on their knees and drank with their mouths in the stream. And the Lord told Gideon, with these 300 men, I will rescue you and give you a victory over the Midianites. Send all the others home. Wow. I had 3,200 soldiers with me to fight a battle that I was too scared to fight anyway. And now God has whittled it down to 300. Why is that? Why would God do that? Ladies and gentlemen, we have to understand that God wants the glory and the credit for what it is that he's doing in our lives. He doesn't want it to be reduced down to a few tests, a few challenges that is no work for him to do anyway, because he can do all things. He doesn't want it to be justified by the proof that we got to show us that it was him. He wants to get all the credit because the only way that it can be done is by him and him alone, and not us at all. So he whittled down these 3,200 soldiers down to 300 so that he could provide a victory that he promised from the beginning, so that we would know that it was him all along. As the story goes, of course, God directed Gideon exactly as to what he should do to get the victory. And because Gideon only had 300 men, he obeyed everything that God said. See, when God strips everything away that you think you need to get something done, the only thing that you're left to do is follow his exact instructions. Once you finally acknowledge that God is the one who's controlling and directing the situation, he'll strip everything away from you that demonstrates your own ability and put you in a situation that the only way that you're going to get through successfully is by listening to him and doing exactly what he tells you. In that way, in the end, you can truly give him all the glory, all the honor, and all the credit for what happens. I could tell you the end of the story, but if you go back and read Judges chapter 6 and 7, it tells the whole story. What's important to know is that sometimes people are not led by God, like the Midianites, and they just do whatever they want to do. They do, and they conquer, and they destroy, and they take over, and they take things away from people that they shouldn't have, but they do it within their own power and strength. They're not led by the Spirit of God. They just do what they want to do. And because they do it, because they're providing an action to get what they want, the principle of having the ability to get wealth and get it more abundantly not only pertains to wealth, but it pertains to anything. If you put the work into anything, then you're going to get the result. if you're willing to do the work. That principle works, and they apply it. And it's not spirituality, but it's a godly principle that works that makes it happen for them. The spiritual, super spiritual, like ourselves or like I have been at some point, we'll sit back and we'll ask God, and we'll go through all of these different changes and ask for all of these different signs and all of these different ways for God to prove himself. In the end, never being satisfied with all of those things being done or none of them being done, and putting ourselves in a position of being catatonic and not moving. And so nothing happens. Only when we finally decide to do what it is that we believe that we're being led to do by God can anything happen. The story of Gideon talks about him being fearful, how he was less than everybody else. And sometimes when we go for positions and we go for different roles in life, or when we try to step out into our talents, gifts, and abilities, or just try to live as what we believe a Christian should be, that seems almost impossible to us. And so in order to stay on the road or the path of righteousness, we continue to ask God for signs to prove that we should be going that way. We don't acknowledge all the things that he's already done for us, but we continue to ask him to prove himself over and over and over again. And sometimes he remains silent in our lives because he knows, even though we don't, that no matter what he does to prove who he is to us, it's never going to be enough. At some point, we just have to decide to follow him. This Old Testament story is a testament to the way that we work as people. It's a demonstration of how we can take something that God tells us and overcomplicate it and ask for signs and wonders when all we should really be doing is following the instructions and trusting the results. It also shows, if we look at the flip side of that, how we, in other cases, don't move when God tells us to do something because we don't see the sign. What would have happened if Gideon didn't see the sign? He knew in the beginning that the angel of the Lord talked to him because the sign was there at the beginning. But what if he didn't get the second or the third sign? He probably would have used that as an excuse not to move. I'll ask you, how many of you or how many of us are not moving on something that God put in our hearts to do that we know only he could have told us to do because we can't do it within our own strength, yet we're still not doing it because we're waiting on God to do something for us? I want to encourage you. Stop waiting. Believe. Have faith that if it's the right thing for you to do in God, that he's going to make the way. And if it's not the right thing for you to do, then you're not going to have a way to make it. But that you have a way to achieve greater and you don't need another sign. You've already had enough. While we're waiting on God to move, God's waiting on us. Because he's already given us the ability to do. If we follow through like Gideon did, the results will be clear. We'll have victory. And victory is promised in our lives when we follow Christ. I encourage you to continue to develop your relationship with God. Continue to listen to him. Continue to trust that he's guiding and moving you in the way that you should go. And the end result will be your victory. Don't be like Gideon, waiting for sign after sign after sign, wasting time when all you really have to do is exercise your faith. Be a doer of the word and not a hearer only. Be a doer of what God has called you to, and not just someone waiting in the wings. And then give God all the glory when he comes through. Hopefully this message was encouraging to you. It's definitely an encouragement to me. Thank you for joining us today. It's the Body of Christ Christian Ministries and Daystar Church campus. Pastor DC Elliott. God bless.